Okay, I'm going to kick us off. We already have a huge crowd here and expect more to come. Welcome to this webinar. We are thrilled to have you here. We appreciate you spending this Wednesday, July 30th with us over the lunch hour, and we hope that you all are eating lunch, at least if you're on the East Coast time zone right now. Today's webinar is about partnerships between student conduct and civic engagement. I'm Bobby Lauer, the president of Campus Compact. I am thrilled to be bringing you this webinar today, particularly in partnership with our colleagues at the Association of Student Conduct Administrators. And we're going to hear from Tess Barker, their executive director, in just a few minutes. Today's webinar is really about helping to meet this moment. You know, at Campus Compact, we're a coalition of 330 institutions across this country of every shape and size. And we know that this issue of thinking about how we safely and productively support students in this moment and how we work through issues around free expression and freedom of speech on campus is of the highest priority and interest among our students, among our faculty, our staff, and all the way up to our presidents. Today is about bringing together particularly two areas of campus that we believe there could be stronger partnerships between, and that is student conduct and civic engagement. And we know there's some great exemplifying examples of what it looks like to be working in partnership. And we're going to talk a little bit about those today from two of our campuses who are here. But we know that people are also seeking new opportunities and new ways of working together, particularly as we step into the fall. So just a little bit of logistics around how today is going to flow. We have three dynamic speakers. First up is going to be Tess Barker, who is the executive director of the Association of Student Conduct Administrators. Next is going to be Caitlin Poe, who is the associate director for civic engagement and expression at Tulane University. And then Mark Shook, who is the dean of students and the deputy Title IX director at the University of South Carolina. After that, we are going to have a robust amount of time for questions. I have a few that I'm going to throw out to our panelists first, but please go ahead and start using chat throughout their presentations to write down questions that you want to hear, and we're going to get to as many as we can. I also want to say up front, we are going to be sharing the slides with you before this session ends that they share today. So no worries on that front. We will make sure you have access to those slides. And with that, I want to start by introducing my friend and actually past colleague from 20 plus years ago back at Towson University. And I see Romy at least is on here, and I think Tess from Towson. Tess. So we have some good TU representation and thrilled that our paths have crossed again in these new roles. So Tess Barker is the executive director of the Association of Student Conduct Administrators.
Great. Thank you so much, Bobby, for allowing me to join today. Hopefully, let me get, I know we've all had the challenge of trying to make sure slides are working when you're talking. Hopefully you all can see my correct slide while I introduce myself. Again, thank you to Bobby and Campus Compact for really starting a conversation with ASCA, the Association for Student Conduct Administration. I have been in this role for about 2 years. I was previously on a campus. And so as I talk about this work or answer questions, you may hear references to the work I have done previously. Most of my work was at regional public universities, four-year regional publics, so 5,000 or smaller or 10,000 or smaller. So for those of you at small institutions who are thinking, how do we find enough staff power to do all the work we need to do? I hear you, I lived it, and know that that is an eternal challenge. To share just a little bit about ASCA, I know we have some of our members, great to see all of you here, but for those of you who aren't familiar with ASCA, we were started in 1989 because there was no professional association specifically focused on those who were doing student conduct work, student judicial work, student behavior influencing work, the whole sphere of work. And so we've really been around less than 40 years. But since those initial days, we have currently over 2,700 members. Vast majority is from the United States, although we do have international representation from Canada and about 6 other countries internationally that know professional association student conduct as a profession has really grown in the United States. And so other countries are often looking to ASCA as they look to professionalize their own work internationally. Like a membership association, we have professional development, journals, publications, affinity groups, ways for our members to get involved. One of the big things our members appreciate is the opportunity to connect one another, much like this, where they can learn best practices, hear suggestions for improvements, and so on. And so ASCA has ample opportunities for our volunteers, for our members to connect in facilitated groups. One of the big things that we pride ourselves on doing for our members is interpreting and translating both case law and legislation so that our members can understand the obligations as they evolve and change on campus. Some of our institutional members have 30 conduct officers on one campus or one system and have easy access to general counsel who can provide that guidance. Other members are, it is perhaps other duties is assigned, maybe 5 or 10% of their job. And for those members, they do not have the capacity or resources to track case law and legislation. So we have a dedicated committee as well as some DC operations that help them support that work to augment what they are hearing from their campus general counsels, never to just replace it. And of course, what we also do is make sure that we're watching trends, what we hear from our members as emerging issues, as emerging solutions, to try to make sure that we can stay ahead of what our members need and prepare them for their work they're doing. And that has been particularly important these past couple of years. And the few slides that I have really are to lay some groundwork on some things that have been changes to the field of student conduct in the past 2 years, leading up to some of the changes of expressive activity that will segue into what Caitlin and Mark will be talking about. Um, it is probably not a surprise to folks that there's a lot of compliance work that goes into student conduct. Some campuses that are large may have a dedicated Clery officer. That, of course, has been a compliance requirement since the 1990s. Some of our conduct members also provide have a dual role as being a Clery officer or just feeding into Clery. Clery has had some stability in recent years, but unfortunately, some of these other federal and legal compliance areas have been changing. Title IX, of course, had changes in 2020, 2024, 2025. It's an evolving area. And although many campuses have elected to stand up an independent Title IX office in recent years, as often as not, we have ASC members who are wearing multiple hats. You may have heard in Mark's title, he has some Title IX responsibilities as well. Even for our conduct members who may not have official Title IX responsibilities, when sexual misconduct does not rise to the technical definition of Title IX, it often gets bumped over to conduct. And so conduct staff are doing investigations and adjudicating cases that look a whole lot like Title IX, but may have a different geography or a different set of participants. So for our conduct officers managing Title IX, what goes between the two offices, if they are both Title IX and the student conduct administrator, how they manage that ever evolving guidance out of Washington, D.C. has been an absolute challenge. We also had just before New Year's the passage of the Stop Campus Hazing Act. It was something that ASCA was in support of passing, but with it comes new obligations, new transparency reporting requirements. And for many conduct officers, they this year are figuring out how to do the proactive education, either alone or in concert with campus partners, ideally. But having to do the proactive education as well as the transparency reporting around hazing is new for the vast majority of our members, not for those of you who perhaps are in Ohio and a few other states that already had state legislation on the book. But that nuance and compliance came pretty late in the year. And so folks have been adapting, and you may hear new education coming out on your campuses about that in the coming weeks. Finally, Title VI, lots of changes or updated guidance has been coming out to campuses. Larger campuses, again, often have a resource office that is focused on Title IX, Title VI, discrimination, harassment. But for mid to small size institutions, understanding the implications for student conduct is often falling on the 1 or 2 conduct staff who are present at that campus. And regardless of the size of campus, this is certainly an area that continues to evolve and change and may cause confusion on campus about how to define certain conduct or actions on any given day. When we think about our students are presenting increasingly complex cases for our student conduct staff. Mental health is something that is well on many people's radar as a growing area of need. In 2024, NASPA did an inaugural survey of top issues for vice presidents for student affairs. The top three issues all had to do with health and well-being. And number two, 82% of them said their concerns about access to mental health supports for students was a main concern. Number two on the list of top 10 concerns. That is exacerbated when students perhaps have an undiagnosed condition or a condition that they're not able to manage. Perhaps it's access to regular healthcare provider, perhaps it's access to funds to maintain medication. But when you have a diagnosis that may have some accommodation requirements that dovetail into conduct, it can become a complex field for student conduct staff to manage. How we make sure that we are meeting accommodation standards within a conduct hearing, if conduct rises to that point, when is a behavior just problematic behavior but doesn't rise to the level of conduct, is also something conduct are navigating with faculty. Since during COVID, many conduct officers were tasked with regulating mask mandate policies, sort of policing of compliance with COVID mandates on campus. And what I've heard from members, and since then, even as that work has been set aside, there's an increased outreach from faculty who want conduct to manage classroom behavior. So work that faculty used to do in terms of managing the classroom environment, addressing behavior in the classroom, more and more they're asking student conduct, make this student behave. Tell this student they can't come back to my classroom until they know how to engage in dialogue the way I want it to happen. It can be frustrating for faculty at times when the conduct does not rise to a level of a violation under a student conduct code. And so one of the trends we're hearing is from conduct folks trying to understand how to partner with our academic affairs colleagues and faculty to support the regulation and the management of the classroom space when it doesn't rise to the level of conduct. Some of that evolves into what we refer to as case management. Case management is different and distinct from conduct in that it's more about helping students proactively and holistically address underlying behaviors or needs before they may rise to conduct. So a student who has food insecurity or has housing insecurity, a case manager may help them find resources to get insurance through the exchanges, to find affordable housing so that they don't do something like steal from the bookstore or steal food from the dining hall that then does put them into the conduct system. Some conduct folks also serve as case managers, and the line between the work can often be blurred. But it speaks to the complexity of what we're seeing, that many schools are actually standing up offices for case management, hiring social workers specifically to do this type of work, to try to address behaviors before they become conduct, but referrals and partnership happens back and forth. Also, we're seeing an incredible uptick in dual enrollment on our campuses. And that has caused some challenges when a student who is a high school student may wind up in the conduct office, just from how the conduct officer may be expected to talk with parents, high school counselors, high school teachers in ways that are different from how we typically work with college students who are presumed to be adults and participate independently or with an independent advisor. Oops. Oh, there we go. This headline, A Punishing Year Ahead, came from an article that many ASCA leaders collaborated with for the Chronicle of Higher Education last fall. It was titled A Punishing Year Ahead. I've adapted that to say we have another punishing year ahead when it comes to expressive activities on our campus. I'm hoping I'm not manifesting it, but that is what the tea leaves are reading. And what has been challenging for conduct officers, and one of the trends is that the expressive activity in the past year and a half, 2 years, has really shined a light on student conduct from what can be seen externally, which is not the same necessarily as what happens in the private confidential spaces where conduct officers work with students and where they implement campus policies and procedures. There can be many impressions or beliefs about what and how conduct should happen on campus. But sometimes we say, if you know one student code of conduct, you know one student code of conduct. And unfortunately, with the media's portrayal from campuses, what one campus does will make people think that's how another campus should respond. We also had challenges where conduct officers protect student confidentiality and take that very seriously from a due process standpoint, from fundamental fairness, from FERPA. And so when they're not able to explain the conduct process It can be challenging to get folks to understand whether they're campus partners or whether they're external partners such as the media, to understand how campus conduct procedures happen on campus. It has really impacted our members. And one of the things that ASCA has really been attuned to is the stories from our members about how media perceptions, about how external pressures as well as internal pressures have impacted them in the work they do. Many helping professions talk about secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. Um, and I think for some folks on really spicy campuses, that might not be a bad analogy. We've heard stories of campus conduct officers who campus police insist on walking them to their car, particularly in the winter when it's night, of campus conduct officers shopping for groceries on the weekends, and people approach them in the grocery store and try to engage them in sharing their opinions or trying to pressure them into having an outcome of a case come a certain way, of folks really of even having to move to different spots on campus where folks don't know where they are working or meeting with students in order to protect student privacy, protect the conduct process, and allow conduct folks to do the work that they were hired to do. Part of which, or the work they're hired to do, which is to support the campus code of conduct through an educational lens with students that all supports their educational outcomes. So it's been a very challenging year for student conduct. This is also an area as vacancies come up, we hear more and more that campuses are not able to refill positions, which makes it doubly and triply hard when we see vast increases in the number of cases. Which takes me to my final slide. Mentioned a lot of media, a lot of external pressures, really questioning due process and fundamental fairness. When something happens on a campus and a conduct officer walks in on Monday and has literally 50, 75, 100 conduct cases for individual students who are involved in a protest or other expressive activity, when they try to follow due process, give individualized treatment to every one of those students and do a proper investigation, timelines can be really extended, which is unsatisfactory to conduct officers as much as it is to the students and to the campus. But often pressures to truncate a proper due process and a proper conduct proceeding may have impacts on whether a student is receiving proper due process and fundamental fairness. And that's one of the challenges that conduct officers are absolutely facing with these expressive activities on our campus. As I mentioned, campus policy and what is written, what student conduct officers are required to uphold, doesn't often match public's expectations for what due process or fundamental fairness may look like. And the work of educating campus partners on that, it's ongoing, but when you have 100 cases or when you have a campus that wants to move very quickly, that can be a challenging educational process for our campus partners or the media. Another challenge is when students, parents, external entities are free to talk to the media about what they have experienced. Campus conduct officers cannot, would not, and do not have that same platform to talk about student conduct cases while they are happening or even after the fact. It would be inappropriate, in some cases very illegal, violation of student confidentiality rights, but it means what plays out in the court of public opinion is very one-sided, but conduct officers professionally don't comment on what we see, and often when they're asked for comment by news reporters, have to decline, and rightly so. We're also seeing a need to really have campuses at the high level ensure that policies around expressive activity, which campus officers very much want to support, conduct officers want to support, is balanced and echoed in a proper way in campus policies around student conduct. So when policies get updated around expressive activity, making sure that the work is done in a collaborative way to make sure any conduct policies, student codes of conducts, etc., are updated in a timely fashion to mirror that will go a long way to making sure all parties involved have the same understanding and expectations as we go into the fall. And there's a general desire by conduct officers, and I think our partners across campus, to have an increased understanding, common understanding at the campus level at a minimum about what are the expressive activity policies on a campus, how do they support students in doing and expressing themselves as we want them to do in a healthy, productive way. And that challenge of how we arrive at that is one I know many of our campuses are taking this summer and into this fall. No quick answers or easy ways forward. But I think what our two colleagues, Mark and Caitlin, have today are examples of ways that conduct and our partners across campus can start to engage our campuses in campus-wide dialogue so that we can at least answer some of these questions going into the fall, provide proactive education that will enable us when we have to have reactive conduct sessions to do it in a way that makes sense with our campus policies, procedures, and our desires for student educational opportunities and expression. I will leave it at that. I think we're taking questions all at the end, correct, Bobby?
Correct. Thank you, Tess.
Right. Yes, thank you. And I'll turn it over to, I think it's Caitlin.
Yes. Before Caitlin gets started, I did want to just make one note, and that is that this webinar really emerged out of one of the affinity networks that Campus Compact has. We have a number of them. One of them is, we call it Truckin', which is the Research University Civic Engagement Network. Part of why I want to say that, I also want to call out Maury Smith from Tulane, who really helped us kind of build this out and brought Caitlin to us, is because you're going to see really two R1 campuses featured today. That's part of why. I mean, we really strive at Compact to consistently showcase a diverse array of campuses. In this case, this really started among our R1 affinity network, but we know that this topic matters to every single institution, which is why we're bringing it to the entire community. So with that, I will turn it over to Caitlin, who will go next.
Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you all today virtually and on screens, and not just like a bunch of little black boxes. And so I'm excited about that. But my name is Caitlin Poe. I use she, her pronouns. Most people call me KP if that's a little bit easier. And I serve as the Associate Director for Civic Engagement and Expression here at Tulane University. For some additional context around Tulane, Tulane is a private institution in New Orleans, Louisiana, with a little under 15,000 students, around 9,000 undergraduates, and 4,000 graduate and professional students. My role is very new. I started in it February of this year, previously working at Tulane since January of 2023. And my role in particular focuses on fostering a culture of proactive civic engagement and free expression through programming, initiatives, education, and management of our university response team, all of which I'm going to touch on a little bit later in my presentation. I do share the fact that this position is new, so what it looks like and what it does is going to shape and shift to the current needs of our students. And we're seeing what it looks like going into a full year. And so today I'm going to share a little bit about how and why we created this role, what the response has been so far, and how we're preparing for the fall. Let's see. So regarding responding to campus and national needs, like many campuses, Tulane has seen increased student activism, heightened conversation around free speech and expression, and the need for meaningful civic engagement opportunities. Traditionally, as Tess kind of touched on, the student conduct side is focused on a little bit more of that reactive response, and when something has escalated to the point of being a conduct case. And so with civic engagement and expression work, it didn't really have a clear home on our campus. And we realized we needed a more proactive structure, something that supported student expression, prepared students for engaging in dialogue, and reduced potential conflict before it even started. And this is where we began exploring ways to kind of bridge those worlds and build something new. So, a little bit about our process. We started by looking at what already existed. The Center for Public Service was doing some incredible work in civic learning and community engagement. Shout out to my colleague Maurice. While the Student Conduct Office was handling some of that policy and accountability. Then the work of free expression in our university response team. That's our cross-campus team of faculty and staff who volunteer. It's about a team of 25. They show up to ensure our freedom of expression philosophy is upheld, while also being a proactive source of education for our freedom of expression philosophy. This was managed jointly between our AVP for campus life and student affairs and the executive director of our student center, who's my current supervisor. And so we noticed a gap. We didn't have dedicated support to helping students navigate how to engage safely and effectively when they wanted to organize, demonstrate, or have some of those harder conversations on campus. And so that led to the creation of my role, which sits in student affairs in our student center. So it has that direct student engagement piece, but focuses directly on civic engagement and expression. And it helps strengthens the coordination with our student conduct office through ongoing conversations, sharing of best practices, making sure we're in alignment. We just underwent a revamp of our current student conduct policy. And so ensuring that our philosophy, our protocols are all in alignment with our current student conduct code. And so now we're able to proactively educate, support, and even plan with students before an event or issue arises. And when we think about campus response, the feedback for this position has been incredibly encouraging, which I think is not necessarily surprising, but is very refreshing to see. So from students, we're hearing that they feel more supported in their activism, clearer about what their rights and responsibilities are, particularly whenever you have a staff member who's dedicated to this work, who can answer questions, be there as a support, and continue to support them in those spaces. They've been excited about what's possible when working together, particularly our student government, which is in my area, and our civically engaged leaders, which I'll touch on a little bit later as well. Our faculty and staff have shared that they're appreciative of having one central place to connect for questions and resources, and are also excited about collaboration opportunities. Particularly, our university response team members are excited to engage in this type of work, receive the training that they need to do it appropriately, and get to give back to students in a different way than their typical roles and responsibilities. From the community, we felt support that they appreciate seeing the dedication and care from the university to this topic. And I don't think surprisingly, but interestingly enough, other institutions have also started reaching out to learn a little bit more about how we structure this and what we've seen in our current work, even though it's relatively new. And we're really seeing that this type of work and this type of position and the collaborations that we're doing are truly in need across higher education right now. And so with the position again being relatively new, we're navigating what this will look like in its first year, right? We haven't had this in the past, so what does our next year look like? And this fall, we're taking more of a comprehensive approach to civic engagement and expression programming. Mark, I'm sure, is going to share some more regarding the work that they've been doing this year, and so I'm excited for you to hear about that as well. But we're continuing events around civic holidays and awareness weeks, and starting to host initiatives like a food for thought event that's aimed at getting together a smaller group of students with local community members, politicians, and members of the Tulane community. There's actually a partnership with Student Conduct to host one of these to dive deeper into topics over a shared meal, as we found students love free food, but food promotes some dialogue and conversation in a little bit safer of a space. And we have a conversation couch program during Free Speech Week, which is an initiative focused on increasing comfortability on agreeing to disagree with a range of topics. And so that can be lighthearted, like is cereal a soup, to a little bit more deep of is social media damaging, and thinking about topics of that nature with the hope to just understand other perspectives. And then the last initiative I really wanted to touch on was the longest table, which many other institutions have done. And we're trying to pilot this at Tulane this year. But we're hosting one long table of about 300 to 500 Tulaneans to come together for a meal and dialogue in a casual setting, just to build community. And this is in partnership with several offices and units across campus. So we have our first year experience team, our student affairs team, Center for Public Service, our leadership learning office, office, different academic units, just to bring together people for that sense of community. And so with all of these programs, the hope is that we're creating something that's accessible and welcoming spaces for students to be able to explore those topics around civics, share perspectives, and overall build community. And to help students engage a little bit more meaningfully, we're implementing a framework to tie back these events and initiatives. There's something I've kind of dubbed clear pathways, which walks them through a circular process of considering their values, learning about issues, engaging in dialogue or action, taking steps that align with their values, and then reflecting on their impact and experiences. And this is kind of rooted in Bloom's taxonomy if you're a student affairs development nerd like me. And we're also enhancing our university response team, URT, their visibility and training with the dedicated support of my position. I know every campus does this a little bit differently in how they respond to protests and demonstrations and things that pop up on campus. And so this is just a little bit of a look at what we do. We have about 25 volunteers, again, from across the university, all in different settings, who meet with us regularly on a monthly basis and sign up for protests and demonstrations and things that are happening on our campus. And so with increased training, this is going to include a greater focus on content neutrality, scenario-based practice, de-escalation techniques, protest navigation, in collaboration with other campus partners, again, like student conduct to come in and share the like rights side of what we are doing. And the goal is to ensure a team is confident and prepared to support students' rights to free expression while also maintaining that safe campus environment. And this year, we're really exploring increased visibility of the URT to help get students more comfortable with knowing that we're here to work with them, not against them in this space. We want them to be able to express themselves. We want them to be able to use their voice, and we want to serve them. And so how can we work with them in this work? And then finally, we're continuing to solidify and expand our partnerships, not just with Student Conduct and the Center for Public Service, who I meet with pretty regularly to discuss our ongoing work, but also with other offices on our campus, like our Office of Academic Excellence and Opportunity, our Restorative Practices team. We're also continuing our partnership with our Civic Engagement Coalition, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. That's a group of faculty, staff, and students in the Tulane community dedicated to civic engagement work. And that's co-led by myself and our executive director of the Center for Public Service, along with some civic engagement fellowship positions for student leaders who are interested in doing more of the work. And with all of these relationships, they're allowing us to take more of a truly collaborative approach, weaving together that education, accountability, and student support into one cohesive effort. And so, some key takeaways. I did want to share the QR code to our own freedom of expression philosophy and protocols and my contact information, just so I don't bog you down with specifics to how Tulane operates. And if you wanted to learn more about that, you're welcome to scan that or follow up afterwards. But our big takeaway is that civic engagement and freedom of expression don't just happen. They really need support, education, and structure. And by partnering across student affairs, we're trying to create a model that builds trust, reduces conflict, and encourages students to fully use their voice. And I personally believe that community is so critical to this work. Building a strong culture that's proactive, having that sense of community, is really where the work begins for me. And so that is me. Thank you all for letting me share some of our story today, and I look forward to continuing our conversation in a little bit. Again, I'm happy to connect afterwards. I think this space is incredibly exciting to be in, and it's not something that you always get to come across every day. But with that, I'll pass it along to Mark, so he can talk a little bit more about USC.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. And you did exactly that. So next up is Mark.
Great. It's so wonderful to be with you this afternoon. As you'll hear in a moment, this is a very passionate topic for me. My name is Mark Shook. As I mentioned, I work at the University of South Carolina as their Dean of Students. I have experience in both civic engagement and student conduct. I worked at the University of Alabama, where I was director of the Blackburn Institute, a leadership development organization with a civic engagement mindset. Also served as the director of student conduct at the University of Texas at Austin. But I've also worked at two smaller schools too, LaGrange College and Presbyterian College, and I'll share my experiences there in the Q&A. So with that, we're going to jump right in. So if you can advance the slide, KP. Um, the first area where there's a partnership between civic engagement and student conduct is on our protest response team, which we have named SEED, Safely Engaging in Expression Delegates. And you can see the little lanyard that we wear. This has three co-chairs. I am one as the Dean of Students, but also the director of our union and our director of multicultural student affairs. That's how we approach it. And you can see from the PowerPoint just how diverse these volunteers are. And when we created this organization, we were focused on finding people that would be good dealing with students. So naturally, we relied heavily on our friends in student conduct. We relied heavily on our friends in civic engagement because we know that they have backgrounds with students that will enable them to be successful in the de-escalation techniques that KP mentioned along those lines. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the work of our C team, we talk about it being at three levels: before, during, and after. Because I think too often when people look at how university approach handling controversial speakers or handling protests or demonstrations, they only think of the during portion of it. With SEED, we focus heavily on the before. So we have SEED representatives that work with students in planning events. If they are some that are controversial in nature, then we also may alert those groups that may be protesting, and we want to work with them on where they can protest, how, because as much work as we can do before, that helps during the event. So SEED has been very successful in that area. And also equally important is the after. So one of the things that we have found based on the nature of the events, and I need to be clear up front with the University of South Carolina. So we are a state flagship institution of over 40,000 students. We are public, so we're bound by all the constitutional protections. And as a state flagship, I mean, we are a hub for controversial speakers. Some people will laugh. In the past year, this is not the past 2 years, in the past year, we've had Ben Shapiro, Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McGinnis, Riley Gaines, Myron Gaines, author of the book Why Women Deserve Less, Nancy Mace, and the Genocide Awareness Project. That was all last year. And so we, on some of those events, for example, the one that had Milo and Gavin, our C team returned 85 phone calls and 300 emails of people that were opposing that event. Whereas Myron Gaines, we didn't know, many people didn't know him, but after his event, the C team was definitely engaging people in explaining why exactly that event had to be held, what the university's responsibilities under the Constitution are, but also, handling students who needed someone to talk to share their feelings because some of these individuals were here on campus with the strict purpose of offending folks along those lines. So that after is an important part. Every time I talk about SEED, I always get questions on training. So one of the things that you can see is our current training agenda for 2 weeks. One thing that's somewhat unique, we bring our friends from legislative affairs to talk about the importance of the work that SEED has in terms of how we as a state flagship are viewed from the Capitol. And we also bring law enforcement in because we partner heavily with them. Also, you can see our university emergency management team does tabletop exercises with that entire group. So the whole university, large community understands the way that SEED operates in partnership with our campus law enforcement. All right, we're going to move on to two major student conduct initiatives that require the support of other units. So again, when we talk about our first one, which is our Creed Week. So Creed Week is sponsored by our Carolina Judicial Council, which is our student hearing board, peer review board, overseen by the Office of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity. And one of the cool things is the Office of Student Conduct is kind of the bearer of our creed. So we do have the Carolinian Creed, which is an aspirational statement of values. And as you'll see in a minute, the creed is thrown back at us when we have controversial speakers who are engaging in what students may perceive as hate speech. You have this Carolinian Creed, which talks about affirming the dignity and value of others. So we're always trying to delineate between an aspirational statement of values and a code of conduct. But as you can see, there are a lot of cool events that occur during Creed Week, and we approach it student conduct. Refresh. Student conduct are not programmers by nature, and I say that as one with student conduct background, so I don't think my friends are going to be offended. So here's a couple of examples that we use. Movie nights, contests. There's a flyer. I do a dean's discussion around a selected book that is there. But the really one I want to highlight is on the next slide. These Carolina conversations are facilitated by our Leadership and Service Center, and they have now done over the past 2 years created one specific for our Creed Week. And so, as you can see from that, that was co-facilitated by Amber Hyatt, who is director of the Leadership and Service Center, and Will Shepard, who is our director of the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs. And these Carolina conversations follow a format of courageous dialogue, which is a leadership program. And so this one came in and they're really looking at how can these students have conversations around controversial topics and do it in a structured and formatted way. So we were highly appreciated of their involvement directly in something that impacted student conduct. And again, student conduct's not the office that is doing all the proactive education, but this was a great partnership. The other partnership is Constitution Day. And you can see from that first one from a couple of years ago where I was coming from. So that Constitution Day event, which again, sponsored by our Carolina Judicial Council, but obviously with heavy participation from around, that very first topic is how do we navigate the intersection of our Carolinian Creed with constitutionally protected speech? And we used case studies, and this was a great event. We had over 150 people at it. You can see the panel on there, how many university representatives came to debrief. And this was one that, our student conduct during this period was starting to see the escalation in cases involving free expression. And so we wanted to be out front. And you can change the slide. And then you can see another couple of things there, another Carolina Conversations, which was focused around Constitution Day. I also have included a portion from our Leadership and Service website where it's referencing some materials for other individuals. And there you can see the link to the University of South Carolina does have a First Amendment webpage, which we direct a lot of traffic to, where some questions are put there. Our Leadership and Service Center, in conjunction with Constitution Day, also created a First Amendment video, and there's a little screenshot there. You're welcome to go check out that video or use that video. They did just an excellent job. So again, those are my slides going through a couple of examples of how our Office of Student Conduct partners with civic engagement.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you can't tell, I'm attempting to also play tech manager here. So doing the best I can. Thank you, Tess, Mark, Caitlin, for your great presentation. I have a couple questions that are already kind of in the hopper. There's one that just came in the chat and others that people have been direct messaging me. So I want to dive right in. One thing I want to jump off with, and you kind of prefaced that you'd be ready to speak to this, Mark, but I mentioned we're featuring today 2 examples of how this plays out at Tulane and University of South Carolina. But we know, as you said, Tess, not all institutions are equal in terms of capacity and support and what it takes to do this work. How can institutions of different scale and size and resource also foster this work in different ways?
Sure, and I can jump in on that. As mentioned, I mean, obviously USC is resourced around this area. When I worked at Presbyterian College and LaGrange, both institutions right at the 1,000 student mark, it was different because as student affairs administrator at a school of that size, you are the show. You're kind of everything along those lines. Most likely, smaller institutions are seeing less activity. We had at USC 25 seat events last year. Smaller schools are going to see that. But I think the key lesson to be learned here, as both KP related at Tulane and I related with USC, our university response team, our SEED, are comprised of volunteers from across the faculty and staff. So I think that is important. I think also at small schools need to rely on professional organizations such as Campus Compact for educational resources and ASCA on training. I mean, I know that if there are schools that are looking for trainings or connection to individuals that have the skill set to do trainings for a protest response team, those can be made available through the professional organizations.
Awesome. Okay, the next one I'd love for everybody to comment on. We have seen a lot over the past several years, but particularly in this past year, in this particular legislative cycle within states where there's been limitations that have been put in place around freedom of expression and directly connected to higher education in some cases. How are you both at the national level tested and within your own campuses tracking, preparing, and navigating the legislation and particularly the student response to that legislation?
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
I can take that first. ASCA, we have a public policy and legislative issues committee that does a lot of work for us. We have a PACER account, some different accounts in Washington, D.C., where we are actually tracking legislation. Our president-elect is also very active in this area. So we're able to see what's coming in terms of legislation, as well as we track cases as they're making their way through the court systems, and then communicate back out to our members when it reaches either a final decision and we help them interpret it, or as cases regionally come up and have a regional impact. It is definitely harder, and our focus is on more of the student conduct administrators and how they do their work. It necessarily impacts student development and education is part of what our organization cares about and our members are focused on. But our work is much more tracking the legislation, helping our members understand when it actually becomes relevant, like required relevant to the work they do and what it might mean, so that if they don't have campus counsel, general counsel coming and informing them internally, we give them the resources to go ask a couple of questions up the chain within their own organization, because we also don't want to supplant what a campus general counsel is going to advise. So it's actually a big part of the work that our volunteer leaders do for ASCA.
I can go next. At Tulane, we work closely with our general counsel, which is, I think, a great segue, and maintain open communication consistently, along with our Office of Government and Community Relations. We actually have members of general counsel who serve in an advisory capacity to our university response team and are at our monthly trainings. They're at our orientation. They're actually coming to our orientation to do an overview of the landscape that we're currently in. We also have our campus safety team and regular meetings with various administrators to ensure that we're tracking, preparing, and navigating the pieces effectively. A couple things that I think are important to note are staying proactive with education. And so our students, I think, sometimes are surprised that things are coming out or don't know how it's going to impact them, or they're navigating a lot of misinformation. And so meeting students where they are and helping them understand what current policies mean for them, whether that's meeting with student leaders, meeting with individual students, and providing them space to talk through concerns that they have, I think really helps increase that trust and understanding of the topic. And then my last piece is around scenario planning and table talks, similar to Mark. The scenario planning and tabletops are so key to the work that we do. We can't anticipate every single thing that's going to happen all of the time, but being able to train our URT for demonstrations and events so that when legislation does spark a strong response, we're already ready to support our students. We're not doing that work after, while also keeping the safety and content neutrality in mind. We also meet with student conduct and other members of administration to discuss ongoing articles, case studies, and really dive deeper into what would be the Tulane approach. How do we navigate alternative solutions to ensure that events can continue even if there's expressive activity happening at them, and then make sure we're all in alignment with how we think is best to navigate those complex issues. And so I think it's about being informed, responsive, and transparent throughout the process while also never diminishing our students' feelings and acknowledging those and figuring out how we can work together with them.
And I can kind of come from a different angle a little bit. So, as I mentioned, our C team has been established for over 5 years. And in a really cool turn of events, I actually got, when the Campus Forum Act was proposed in the South Carolina legislature, I was invited to actually go talk about it. I was actually able to sit down with the sponsoring senator and say, this is what we do at South Carolina, and this is what feedback I have. So I do think it is possible when some of these teams become a little more established to be seen as a resource rather than a distractor within the State House. And that wasn't the case when, I first arrived at USC. So it's nice to see some of that impact. I also think that there are a lot of really good trainings that are out there around this time. I know I just came back from Detroit facilitating a free expression and First Amendment track at ASCA's Gearing Academy, which is geared towards response teams as well as conduct administrators on the back end.
What a great story, Mark, around like really how you position yourself as a thought leader in that situation in the state. Okay, here's a great question. And there's a flurry of them. I don't know we're going to get to all of them, but one that I know a lot of folks are thinking about is that what are some best practices around conduct violations and particular protesting specifically for international students? How are you navigating citizenship status when it should and should not be considered when you're assigning sanctions? And how that could affect, particularly in this moment, their visa requirements or eligibility.
Absolutely. And I can hop in on that one as well, because I do think within the field of student conduct, there is something called constructive suspension or constructive expulsion. Because when you're working with an international student, a suspension could end up being a constructive expulsion because of the impact on the visa status. So I think offices have to be considerate, and student conduct is pretty good as a field of making sure you look at each case individually, because you have to look at every situation. Tess, is there anything else you'd want to add in terms of the field?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think, some of the headlines were, school of, kicks a student out. The school puts them on suspension, and it's technically the visa then gets revoked because they have no student status, but the impact on the student is the same. I think this is also, as Mark said, this is a place where the individualized consideration comes into account with these professionally trained conduct officers. They also consider, if we interim suspend a student who's a domestic student and they no longer can live on campus, do they have a place to go? Will they be able to access the the meals and the dining? What are the other impacts? So being able to think holistically about the student is something that should be part and parcel of the conduct process. It is not going to excuse conduct or behaviors that rise to the level of needing to be addressed with a sanction or an outcome, but conduct officers with the proper training should be taking into consideration all variables about the student's holistic experience.
Okay, kind of connected to that, I think, is this question that Rob put in the general chat that I want to go to, which was any creative ideas on managing demonstrations that are mostly community members and not students?
I may have an unsatisfactory answer for Rob. And one of the things is, we know that there are entities who pay for protesters to go travel to campuses and do not have an intent or an interest or desire to have those conversations. They are traveling to a protest, to an expressive activity site with a different purpose. At least that is my impression. There's even been some different legislation. I think it was in Texas, Mark maybe can correct me if I'm wrong, where policy language was actually changed to talk not about the community, but to talk about students and name employees and faculty and staff as who the policy and the responses are beholden to. For student conduct, our focus is on the students. Many staff wear multiple hats and they have skills that can help in de-escalation, but from ASCA's perspective, I'm going to always advocate and say that our conduct staff have to be focused on the students and the community, campus community, first and foremost. Also knowing that sometimes those external folks really, if they don't want to engage in constructive conversations, you cannot make them. And so being able to focus your limited energy where it can have an impact, I think is a priority.
And Tess, you are exactly right that Texas has introduced legislation and hasn't passed yet, which is specifically focused on protecting the rights of students and explicitly saying, community members can't be here. As a public institution, that's a little hard. I do think that's where looking at your policies are important. Do you have a policy that is mandatory? You have to share your ID if asked by a campus administrator, because that's one, if you don't have that in your policy, then it's going to be hard to enforce. But that's also where advanced communications with your law enforcement, because again, if there are community members that are disrupting an event to the point where a heckler's veto is occurring, and they're not responsive to the community members, that's where law enforcement's going to come in. So I do think that's a great question, because it does happen.
Caitlin, do you have anything to add to that one?
I'll just share as a private institution, we navigate those things a little bit differently. And so our public sidewalks are really the only space in which community members can engage in a demonstration. And typically our demonstrations for recognized student organizations and students individually have to be registered 2 days in advance. Counter protests, on the other hand, do not have to be. And so we sometimes show up in response as support for the counter protest to ensure that our students are safe, that it's being managed appropriately, but we don't necessarily show up for the community members themselves, and then we navigate them to a different place. I would also echo what Mark said about the policy around having to show your student ID or your ID in some capacity. And then whenever we have things like our book fest, which invites a bunch of community members to campus, we have our freedom of expression philosophy posted outside of every single event, a statement said before every event, and we have a section related to invited guests and the adherence to our policies through that. And so we just have a scaffolded approach, so we navigate up to law enforcement if necessary.
Okay, unfortunately, I think we're going to end our questions there, just given the time. I do want to note this question that we just landed on brings up for me some additional questions that I think are worth thinking about. We're here talking really about the student-facing civic engagement work and professionals in partnership with student conduct, but deeply ingrained in what Campus Compact does, and many of the folks on this call, is also in the lane of community partnerships and really serving as that trusted ally and co-creator with community partners. And I do think we have seen a number of examples over the past couple years where this has come at the intersection, when it has not just been a generalized public. It is also about what about when that public are community partners and our neighbors that we are actively in partnership with, and how can these offices of community engagement and folks who are in that work also be collaborators in this, in thinking about how we deal with these situations when they arise. So I think that's just another area that we could have a rich discussion about and think about in future conversations. I also want to name, I got a great comment that was sent to me related to potential collaboration when student conduct asks for help from civic and student engagement members related to when community service is given as a sanction. And how can there be really rich collaboration opportunities in that regard? So just, I think, something else to unpack. I also want to say many people, or several people, asked for more info and information about the stuff that Caitlin and Mark shared, particularly related to Carolina Conversations. And we're going to gather as much as we can and send it to you. So I put a bunch of links in chat. We're going to get that all up to you along with the recording and any other sort of resource that Caitlin and Mark might want to share. So please join me in thanking Tess and Mark and Caitlin for today, and all of you for joining us. There's clearly much more to come on this. Have a wonderful day.